This is Dennis, and he has a wooden cutting board problem, not to mention the rest of the wood in his kitchen. They require maintenance and are long past due, so let's get to it. When a water droplet is placed on a wooden cutting board, it should not spread and soak. This is bad news bears. This board is also rough to the touch, has very deep cuts, and even has burn marks. It needs to be sanded.
Now to sand it, we can either just straight use sandpaper, or we can actually use a sanding block. Or better yet, we can take a box like this one and actually take the sandpaper, wrap it around the outside, and use this. It's going to make it a lot easier.
However, this board needs a deep sanding, so outside we go. He sets up a table on the lawn in the scorching Florida heat. Then, using a towel, he lays it out like a tablecloth, because it is, after all, time for a picnic. He uses plastic and paper so that he can recycle, because he cares about the environment.
Looks like someone got into a fight with a cougar.
Once he's used a low-grit sandpaper such as 60 grit, it's time to move on to a finer, in this case 220. He sands the board smooth and then cleans, because sawdust is bad and incredibly sawdusty. Once back inside, he wipes the boards down with a paper towel, but they are still incredibly dusty. He spreads them out and, using a moist paper towel, wipes them down on all sides. Then he grabs a plastic shower curtain, because his towel is still covered in sawdust from earlier. He spreads the wood out and grabs his cutting board oil, which is nothing more than mineral oil with vitamin E. He highly recommends purchasing a gallon of the stuff, as it is more cost effective. Just don't use olive oil, canola oil, and definitely not motor oil. As he attempts to pour it, he realizes it's still sealed, so he removes the seal and tries again. He pours the oil out liberally onto the cutting board, making sure to soak it. Then, using paper towels or a regular towel, he rubs the oil in as best he can across all the surface area, not worried about pools forming. He repeats the same process for his own cutting board. Working in concentric fashion, he makes sure to rub the oil into all the nooks and crannies, including the juice valleys. Once complete, it leaves a layer of oil on the board that has a nice sheen to it. The board should not be dry at this point. Worry not, most of the oil will soak in. Again, he repeats the process for his wooden spoons and his wood-handled knives, like this one, but not chopsticks, we can skip those. The same process applies to wood salad bowls, but he has none, because he eats meat. Once lubed, he sets them aside and cleans up.
My hands do feel super smooth though. Might have to do this regularly.
As you should, about once a month or when you sharpen your knives. He returns a few hours later and most of the oil has been absorbed, so much so that certain areas are actually dry. Other areas are saturated, which is good. As a result, he adds more oil to the dry areas and rubs it in, for good measure. He then flips his boards over and repeats the process of applying copious amounts of oil and rubbing it in.
This board is particularly thirsty.
Boop.
We'll let this sit for 5 or 10 minutes and come back to it.
And allow the oil to absorb. When he returns, the boards are good. He wipes them down and, using a plain pot ladle as this one, stores them emphatically to dry. This allows airflow and proper runoff if necessary. Then, he cleans, because ants. He sets the boards to the side and places a play card on them to signal no to occur. Cleaning a cutting board is simple. To remove smells or bad stains, he cuts a lemon or lime and sets it aside. Then he covers the board in baking soda, not baking powder. He would add more, but apparently he is out. Then, using the citrus fruit, he rubs the board to make a paste. You can also use vinegar instead, and yes, this will recreate the volcano you made in 5th grade science class. Continue to rub down the board until it is clean and odor-free. Then simply dry it off, and since it leaves a slight residue, he will also wash the board. Washing a cutting board is also very simple. Using a mild dish soap, he simply scrubs it down, making sure to wash both sides of the board, if he can manage it in his fancy sink. He rinses it off thoroughly in water and then dries it as best he can with either a dish towel or a paper towel. He also wants to ensure that it is dry on both sides, in preparation for the next tip. Always dry your cutting boards vertically. Inexpensive pot lid holders such as this one work extremely well. If you don't have a rack to store the cutting board in such a manner, simply dry it off as best you can, then, using one hand and avoiding all electrical outlets, lean it up against the wall to dry. Cutting boards are notoriously slippery, even the ones with anti-slip feet. To mitigate this, you can lay a towel underneath and place your board on top. However, the board still slides. There is no room for airflow, and any moisture in the towel will be passed onto the board. The best method is to utilize cabinet liners. 2 long strips cut to your board size work best. Place your board on top and you can no longer scratch records in your own kitchen. The liners also elevate the board, keeping it out of possible puddles and allowing proper airflow. Never ever 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 use bleach on your cutting board. Wood is naturally germ and bacteria resistant, and the bleach would simply dry and damage the wood. Although dishwashers are a cook's best friend, especially us lazy cooks, it is not the place for a cutting board. Nor is it a place for your wooden spoons or your wood-handled knives. The harsh chemicals dry the wood and turn them into ocean driftwood. So don't do it under any circumstance. Tough stains might seem like a soak in water could fix, but your board is neither a ship nor a flotation device, so don't do it. This can expand and warp the wood, which would render it useless. Never place your cutting board in the oven, unless you're trying to smoke a brisket, in which case enjoy your brisket and the fire. The next day he returns to his well-oiled cutting boards. And they are magnificent. They shine with life and give honor to the wood from which they were fashioned. Deep and rich in color, they are now ready for the tasks of the kitchen. The boards are smooth, the deep cuts are but a forgotten memory, and the burn marks are slight, a reminder of its past and its purpose. A drop of water, the source of life, now beads, signaling proper maintenance and readiness of the board for future challenges. Knives, once dry and worn, now glimmer with power and strength, ready to cut the steaks they were forged to cut. And so, we have cared for the wood in our kitchen and prepared for the future. A bright future, full of life, food, and sustenance. So go forth and lube the wood in your kitchen. A massive thank you to my patrons on Patreon, and make sure to watch these other videos. And until next time, eat well.
Shout out if you know what Dragon's Maze is.